She's a heart attack ready to happen.
We still don't have a president.
For hearing?
We're all just waiting.
For hearing, we're set. Yes. All right.
All my nice stuff come from my mom.
So I'll call the Senate Finance Committee meeting to order. And
Dad had a big part of that one too.
first bill on our list of hearing is 1466. And we'll come on up and introduce the bill.
Okay, good afternoon, Senate Finance Committee. For the record, my name is Representative Judy Aaron. I represent Sullivan County District 4, which is the towns of Ackworth, Goshen, Langdon, Leominster, and Washington. I'm introducing this bill, HB 1466, to you today relative to providing disaster relief funding to municipalities after a natural disaster. Last summer, in July 2023, as well as in July 2021, many towns experienced flooding due to heavy rains. Excuse me. In 2022, after the 2021 floods, the legislature passed SB 409, which provided for state-funded disaster relief loans to be accessible by municipalities from the state treasury after a federal disaster declaration was made by the President of the United States. This was basically to help them pay for repair work, essentially tiding them over until reimbursement is received from FEMA. The problem with this method is that it is wholly unworkable and inexpedient for the municipality for a few reasons. Number one, you have to wait many weeks and often months for a federal disaster declaration to be made by the President of the United States. Towns don't have the luxury of waiting weeks and months to make their roads passable and safe. You cannot access state loan money until a federal disaster is declared. Number two, the timing to obtain a loan from the state is way too long, considering a municipality cannot get a loan until they also get approval from the town voters. That involves setting up a town meeting, a special town meeting. It can take 2 months for a town meeting to get arranged, especially if a bond attorney is needed by the town for obtaining a state loan. Plus, a special town meeting can be a huge expense for a small town. This is problematic for towns who wish to get the zero-interest loans from the state, as per RSA 21-P:37-C. Further legislation would be needed to streamline the special town meeting process in the event of a disaster. It took Ackworth 66 days to get permission to hold and schedule a special town meeting in 2021. And I sent around to you a copy of the timeline for that special town meeting. That was back in 2022 when our state was flush with ARPA funding and a healthy surplus. Yet Ackworth could not get any immediate financial help from the state. The loan process set up by SB 409 in 2022 sought to fix that, but it didn't work. There was and still is no other emergency statutory vehicle to help municipalities get back on their feet quickly. So in 2022, Ackworth had to go somewhere else to get help. We held a town meeting to authorize a $2.1 million loan from Mascoma Bank, who is willing to work with us. It is 2024, and we just finally paid back that loan, along with $60,000 in interest. Because FEMA reimbursement was so excruciatingly slow, Mascoma Bank was very patient and worked with the town. Our town had and still has enormous financial challenges facing us, and 4 roads are still closed, including 2 major commercial thoroughfares. I believe, Senator Pearl, you've been to Ackworth and can attest to the roads in our town. So since SB 409 was passed, I don't know of any town that has applied for or received a state zero-interest loan after a flooding event. Ackworth didn't even apply for the state loan after the 2023 flood because the process wasn't even in place, and because we had already exceeded the amount the town could borrow, and also because we couldn't incur the expense of a special town meeting. Number 3, reimbursement from FEMA can take years. It's been 3 years since July 2021 flooding in Ackworth, and we're still waiting for reimbursement on some of the projects from the work that had been done during that flood, or as a result of that flood. We still have 5 projects outstanding from FEMA from the 2021 flood. In the meantime, we've had another flood event in July 2023 that washed away most of the work we did to repair roads from the 2021 flood. So we've just begun to formulate and submit project reimbursement for that. So far, only one of those projects has been obligated by FEMA. It must be noted that had we gotten all of the financial help we needed to get repairs done from the 2021 flood, we wouldn't have had so much more damage in July 2023. The fact is, small towns like Ackworth that have about 850 people cannot absorb the kind of damage done overnight by these kinds of natural disasters. Towns like mine could save money for 20 years and not be able to make themselves whole because they just don't have the tax base and resources to fully recover. Decades of investment in our roads and bridges were demolished in one night, causing issues concerning safety, commerce, the environment, and quality of life. I can tell you that my town suffered tens of millions of dollars of road damage, bridge damage, and crop damage. Road repair work has been slow and expensive, and not all of it is eligible for FEMA reimbursement. On top of that, FEMA only pays to put the road back to the condition it was before the disaster event, so they may not even cover mitigation efforts of larger culverts or road or stream diversion to prevent similar destruction from reoccurring. Going with their hazard mitigation program is even a much longer process, although to their credit, our own New Hampshire DES has been more responsive and helpful regarding emergency permitting and engineering work, but it's still fraught with much bureaucracy as well. New Hampshire Department of Homeland Security Emergency Management has been quite responsive and helpful as well. And that being said, it's taking almost a year to address mitigation plans for the flooding of Bowers Brook in Ackworth, right by historic buildings and the village store. So number 4, towns need access to funding as quickly as possible, especially when the window of time to do construction work before winter may be short. Again, current processes are extremely time-consuming. I can tell you that after the July 2021 flooding in Ackworth, DES and Homeland Security Emergency Management did not come until September 8, 2021 to assess damage, a full month and a half after the floods hit us. Yet in that time period, we had to make roads passable not only for emergency vehicles, but for our citizens' safety. We literally had one road available to get in and out of town for a time. Currently, after the July 2023 floods, we still have 4 roads that are closed and a totally destroyed bridge that won't be repaired for another 2 years. I have a crater and an impassable bridge at the bottom of my driveway on Forest Road. Every time I've asked about getting immediate state financial help for a municipality that has suffered incredible loss due to this kind of extreme flooding, I get the same answer. We have available funds in the state, but there's no statutory vehicle to get any kind of emergency funding to a municipality. So here I am today with a plan to create a statutory vehicle. We have a fund already established. Let's put money in it and allow towns that need help after disaster to access it. If there are some details that need to be worked out, I'm open to any amendments to fix them, especially as it relates to the funding, timing, and approval process through the fiscal committee, etc. Just as a presidential declaration of emergency is the trigger for federal funds to be made available, I'm proposing that the governor declare a natural disaster in the state, which would then allow municipalities to apply for grant funding from the existing Emergency Response and Recovery Fund in RSA 21-P:46. This bill amends the RSA to include municipalities to access funding. We can put money into this fund from our rainy day fund or from wherever the fiscal committee deems doable. A municipality can, with the help of Homeland Security Emergency Management, go directly to the Joint Fiscal Committee with a request for assistance. Joint Fiscal can decide to allocate some or all or none of the municipality's request. Again, this just gives a statutory authority for the state to financially help a municipality after a natural disaster and a gubernatorial disaster declaration. It would go a long way to help municipalities get on their feet more quickly than waiting months and years for money to come from federal government FEMA reimbursement program. Excuse me. I also want to make mention of SB 402. That was also passed in 2022, which we all thought would be a big help and a solution to getting funds to our towns. SB 402 was supposed to help our municipalities and help relieve their financial burden. That bill allowed for 50% share between the state and municipality of the non-federal share, which was 10% in 2021 and 25% in 2023. For those projects eligible for costs relating to FEMA public assistance for the projects, the costs and reimbursements, and what Ackworth is expecting in reimbursement from the state of New Hampshire, which amounted to $102,798.79 back in January 2024. My town of Ackworth is still waiting for that 50% match from the 2021 FEMA reimbursements. Langdon and other towns I know haven't even asked for their share of funds because they didn't think they'd ever see it. And I would wager that most towns don't even know that this is a thing that's available. As for the notion that if a town gets state grant money, they may be ineligible to receive FEMA funding, for one thing, FEMA is changing some of their rules as to what is reimbursable and what is not. Some of the immediate emergency money to make roads temporarily passable and safe may be reimbursed, as FEMA has done with this with parts of Cranebrook Road in Ackworth, but some other parts may not be reimbursed. So you can never tell what FEMA will accept for reimbursement. It's always been an uncertainty for towns as to what expenses will be reimbursed by FEMA or not. And I can tell you that the towns I represent are tired and disgusted in working with FEMA. It's been a bureaucratic nightmare, and our towns don't get back nearly as much money as they put in claims for. Our small towns simply don't have the town staff or time to deal with FEMA's bureaucracy. They lose files, and we've had to repeat information for new FEMA staffers over and over again. Towns are telling me that they would much rather have a state program in place to help them. They feel it would be more expedient and efficient, and other states do this, states like Florida. A state program like what I'm proposing in this bipartisan bill would go a long way to quickly helping a small town with little resources to at least begin to rebuild after a natural disaster and make roads and other infrastructure safe for its citizens and businesses. This can help a town pay for various expenses incurred to quickly open up roads and make them passable, especially if they don't have ample funds in fund balance or in their capital reserves. And this is a key point. And while towns do put away money in capital reserve funds for rainy days like that, often it's not nearly enough for the extensive damage that they incur. Reopening roads requires trucks of material, excavator time, new culverts, engineering time, and a host of other expensive activities and resources. So I hope that you will consider what I've presented today. It's time we allow the state to step in to help municipalities in a time of need. And I ask that you look over the report that I gave to you all from the Pew Trust about how states pay for natural disasters in the era of rising costs. It is illuminating to see how poorly New Hampshire fares against other states. Lastly, reports indicate that expenditures for the Federal Emergency Management Agency's Public Assistance Program, which municipalities seek reimbursement from after a natural disaster, alone increased by 23% when comparing the 2000 to 2009 and 2010 to 2019 decades. The federal government as a whole spent at least $460 billion on disaster costs from 2005 to 2019. And we're already hearing that FEMA is beginning to run out of reimbursement money and that they're backing away from funding certain reimbursement programs and requests. As a state, we have to be prepared to help ourselves. So let's start that process. I thank you and I appreciate your time, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Questions from the committee? Senator?
I have a couple of questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Rosenwald.
So there are two funds that are referred to in this bill.
Right.
The one in 21P46A and the one in 2146. The one in 21P46A, the way I read it, is funds that go to individuals, not communities. So I'm a little confused about whether we might need to change that.
Well, I had been in discussion with Director Buxton from Homeland Security Emergency Management, and I guess from what I understood, his thought was either fund might be able to be the vehicle where money could be placed to reimburse or to, to be able to give to a community. So I kind of left it up to say that, maybe if a request comes to the fiscal committee, they can decide which fund they would want to place money in. And if we have to change the wording in either places of the statute to accommodate a municipality's request, then that's language that we can put in to do that.
Can I follow up? So you don't really mention a source of funds or an appropriation here. What
So-
are you imagining?
Okay,
the
let me
fiscal committee could
tell you what I
actually do?
envision here. Okay, there's a natural disaster. A town says, oh goodness, we could use, $50,000 or $75,000, because I made it a cap of $100,000, just so there's a little bit of infusion of cash to the municipality. They would take their work with Department of Homeland Security Emergency Management, take their request to the fiscal committee. The fiscal committee can then decide where they have available funds. It could be in the rainy day fund, it could be in the general fund, it could be, I don't know, wherever. And then they can take those monies from whichever fund they feel they have availability to accommodate the request, if they feel that the request is reasonable, legitimate, whatever. And then they can move that money into either one of these New Hampshire Emergency Response and Recovery Fund or the New Hampshire Disaster Relief Fund. And then the funds could be dispersed from those funds for the town. It just allows for the statutory vehicle to allow to do that. Now, I had also spoken to Representative Weiler, who's chair of Finance Committee, and he said that that was something that was doable. So I'm going by that. I'm not truly familiar with how funds get allocated or reallocated or dispersed out. But however we can do that, I think, is fine if there's any amendments to the language that's currently in my bill to be able to do that kind of thing.
Thank you.
Additional questions from the senators? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Okay.
Representative Cloutier?
Thank you. I have also a copy of my testimony, so thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm going to be short. I did not prepare any written testimony because I wasn't sure whether I would be here today, but I simply want to echo the testimony of the the bill's prime sponsor, Representative Aaron, and I applaud her for introducing this bipartisan and fiscally responsible piece of legislation. And I'm here today, should have represented John Cloutier, Sullivan County District 6, which comprises the communities of Croydon and Claremont. And today I'm here to plead especially for our small communities throughout the state, including Sullivan County, and specifically the community of Croydon. And I have represented Sullivan County, been on the delegation for quite some time. And probably approximately half our 15 municipalities in Sullivan County are under 1,000, either 1,000 or under. And these small communities, when a natural disaster hits, quite often is devastating to them. It is devastating to their roads, but it also has a huge impact on their budgets. So I believe this legislation, 1466, is an improvement on what we've tried to do in the past, and what we did previous terms was well-meaning, but did not go far enough. And I think this bill, as amended by the House, is a big step forward. And I realize there may be some other details to work out, but I would urge you to seriously review this legislation, do what you have to, because you got to remember our small communities who do not have big populations, big tax bases, in order to deal with the natural, and because of our changing weather patterns, this situation is probably going to continue, maybe even get worse. I hope not, but I notice the pattern. It is not very good. So with all due respect, I urge this committee to give House Bill 1466 a positive recommendation in some form. Thank you.
Questions from the senators?
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Good afternoon, Chairman Gray and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Catherine Heck, and I represent the New Hampshire Municipal Association, and we are here to support this piece of legislation that came over from the House, House Bill 1466. And of course, we do want to acknowledge that the legislature has been filing bills and really acknowledging that these types of issues going back to 2022, and I won't repeat anything that the sponsor said, as she gave an extremely detailed testimony. I will say that, of course, especially our smaller communities, when they're faced with this type of natural disaster, they don't typically work with federal agencies and FEMA on a regular basis. Homeland Security and FEMA are excellent partners. They do come in and they do teach us all the nuances and the training and the information that we need in order to make proper reports, but it is a time-consuming process. And of course, some of our towns, if you don't go through it often or you have a large staff, it certainly is a bit of a lift. When we look at our cash flow, for example, $100,000 at the right time of the year when we haven't collected any taxes, because we collect in June and December, really could make a huge difference for a municipality to get that road open or to remediate that immediate damage for their community. So we are here to show our support for the legislation, and thank you for your continued partnership in recognizing that these natural disasters are extremely difficult to recover from. They do require a lot of partnership, both from the state and the federal government, and that any tool in the toolbox certainly will be put to good use. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions from senators? Seeing none, thank you very much. That's the last person on the list that asked to speak. There was one other representative who signed in favor. And online we have how many? You have it. Okay. In the front. In the front. The front of that section. 18 in support, 0 opposed. Okay. Anyone else? Seeing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize. I thought I checked the box to speak. I'm State Representative Hope Damon, Sullivan District 8, the towns of Ackworth, Langdon, Leominster, Goshen, Washington, Springfield, Sunapee, my hometown of Croydon, and the city of Claremont. I'll be very brief and not repeat what has previously been noted. I just want to acknowledge, for folks who might not live in one of these rural towns, the scale of the damage. So Croydon is less than 800 people. We have an 18-hour-a-week town clerk. We have a father and son road crew, and that's our paid municipal staff. That's it. So when these kind of events happen, it's an all-volunteer team, as Catherine Heck noted, trying to understand FEMA, trying to figure out how to proceed, and people work very diligently, but it is a very unfamiliar territory, and having more help from the state would be, and in a timely manner, would be extremely valuable. The other piece I would note is that for most of these rural towns, the number of miles of road is greatly disproportionate to the number of citizens. And so what the tax base, the property taxes that are being paid in, a large part of the municipal budget is to maintain the roads before the weather events occur. There just simply isn't the depth of resources that are needed. There are other things that have been said, so I won't repeat. I do just want to acknowledge the value in the bill of permitting the governor to make a disaster declaration, because in these past events, that was a delay that we think could have been avoided. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Questions from the senators? Seeing none, thank you very much. And we will close the public hearing, and as soon as we're ready, we'll open the next one.
You got 2 minutes, Senator.
I have 2 minutes?
Yeah,
My
use
goodness.
it wisely. Oh, we're one behind? Ah, then you're late. My bad. I'm vice chair. I only pay half attention. Would you like me to send that over?
He's right there. Okay. Come on. So we'll open the public hearing on House Bill 1593 and ask to introduce yourself and the bill.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My name is Jerry Stringham. I'm the state rep from Lincoln, Woodstock, and Easton, up in the North Country, and appreciate the opportunity to be here. House Bill 1593 is a bipartisan bill that came out of Health and Human Services with a 17-3 recommendation, passed in the House on a voice vote, and subsequently passed Finance 23-1, and also passed on a voice vote. This bill was necessitated by a disruption to the Developmental Services Program that was caused by an unannounced change in the list of eligible services that those qualifying for the Medicaid disability waiver were accustomed to. And this happened after the last budget was completed. Individuals previously receiving recreational services like bowling, swimming, karate, and other activities that promote socialization with the general public and help advance health and safety goals were no longer part of the waiver program. So basically you had people going in for their budget renewals this year, and then one or more particular line items were being crossed out. So the disability waiver provides a breadth of services for these individuals. And, without warning, one was kind of taken away and nothing replaced it. So what this bill does is provide a maximum of $600 per person through the end of this budget cycle only, prioritizing those that have participated in these programs under a prior individualized service budget, and it would be effective on passage. The program would have an income and medical necessity means test for any participant. There is an appropriation of $500,000, but there is comparable savings in the budget because these items were going to be paid for 2 years under the budget that we did last year. But already people are having these taken out, so we're looking at paying for just 1 year of these services. So the real net on the budget is zero, but we still thought it was appropriate to include this as an appropriation since it is in a different part of the budget. I'd like to note this is a one-time fix and does not create an ongoing obligation for the legislature to address this and other issues in providing services to the developmental disability community beyond this biennium. The Finance Committee amended the bill to limit the services to adults who have left the school system and thus have fewer opportunities for community recreational programs. And the amendment also requires the Department of Health and Human Services to produce a timely report so that adjustments to the developmentally disability program can be included in the next biennium. Hopefully we can find other services that fill in now this void that kind of came up unexpectedly. As I said, this passed the House on a voice vote and 23-1 in finance. Happy to answer any of your questions, and I thank you very much for your time.
Questions from the senators? Okay, thank you very much. We've got a lot of people who signed up and didn't check the box to speak. Chris Besso? No? B-E-E-S-O? Are you Chris?
I am Chris. Good afternoon.
All right. Go ahead.
My name is Chris Biso. I am the Director of Special Education for the Mascoma Valley Regional School District. We are up in the Upper Valley, adjacent to Lebanon. We are Enfield, Canaan, Dorchester, Orange, Grafton. And I am here representing the New Hampshire Association of Special Education Administrators. We are in favor of HB 1583 for school districts, small rural school districts with high free and reduced lunch numbers. An influx of this kind of funding would be especially important for New Hampshire children, especially with children with individual education plans. HB 1583 has also received bipartisan support.
This is 1593.
Oh, I'm here for 1583.
Oh, that's.
Wrong bill?
Wrong bill.
All right.
Probably want to go sign up on the right sheet.
Gotcha.
Okay.
I guess I'll be back in a little while, right? Thanks, guys.
Alex, K-O-U-T-R.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Alex Katrubis. I'm here to represent the 10 area agencies. Last fall, as you heard, we worked with Representative Stringham and Representative Edwards as representatives of Division 3 in the House Finance Committee to get this legislation filed. And I will try not to repeat because I think Representative Stringham did a nice job summarizing the issue, but just to reiterate, this bill is an attempt to restore recreational services that were historically funded for people with developmental disabilities served by DHHS and the area agencies. The reason that we're here is that CMS recently clarified to New Hampshire DHHS that certain recreational activities and services are not eligible for reimbursement under our Medicaid waivers. These waivers fund about 95% of the DD program in the state budget. And the result of the clarification was that certain recreational services were taken away from some individuals.
I'm going to ask you to pause for a minute. Just so that the audience knows, so we can't have standees. So if there's not a seat, then you're going to have to watch the live stream out in the hall, and we will go out and try to find you. If you're not here for 1593, which is the bill we're on right now, please give your seat up to somebody who is. And with that,
Okay,
back to
thank you. So when we learned about this, we did have meetings with the Department of Health and Human Services. I had met with the commissioner and the senior leadership, and we tried to see if there was a way that we could deal with this without legislation. Ultimately, the result of those meetings was that we made the decision that we needed legislation, so here we are. I can give you some data. Unfortunately, it's not the greatest data, but I'm fairly confident this is a rough estimate of what happened. So before COVID, these services really haven't been provided in the last several years, but prior to 2020, each area agency spent about $50,000 a year for these types of services. So there's 10 area agencies. So that gives you a statewide total of about $500,000. And as Representative Stringham said, historically, this was part of the individualized budgets under the Developmental Services Program. Half of that would be general funds, half would be federal funds. So historically, again, don't quote me necessarily on this number, but I think it's a reasonable estimate based on about 5 of the 10 area agencies. We had to go literally by hand to calculate this. Unfortunately, we couldn't just press a button and say what was the total amount of funding that we were using for recreational services prior to 2020. But a rough estimate is that there was about $250,000 of general funds being expended on this program historically. And we believe there's about 1,500 individuals who had some level of recreation in their budgets. The bill as introduced was quite different than what left the House. As introduced, it was actually $1 million appropriation. It was going to be a continuously appropriating fund. The fund was going to be managed by a new state employee within the department. We were going to write administrative rules to set up a program over the long term. And as you heard, the House made a lot of changes to the bill through 2 committees. The appropriation was cut in half. They deleted making it a permanent fund. They deleted the rulemaking. Rather than manage it within the department, they proposed that we outsource it to a provider agency rather than a state employee. The House made the program applicable to adults only. As introduced, it would have applied to children as well. They capped the amount per person to $600. And they required the vendor who was going to take this on to make a good faith effort to restore the services to individuals who may have had those taken away. And as you heard from Representative Stringham, there's reporting requirements once the program is completed so that we have an idea what types of services people are requesting, what are the costs, and so forth. And I'll just wrap it up to say that the individuals who are going to receive these services they're a very needy group of individuals. They're on Medicaid, they're on Social Security. As you heard, that means there's a medical and a financial means test. Through circumstances of their birth, they have limited ability to earn income via employment than folks in the general population. So they have fewer opportunities to spend dollars on recreation. So we believe that this is a very modest investment to provide a little more flexibility to the developmental disability program, to have some general funds there for people who want to participate. As you heard, many of these services include swimming, karate, art classes, joining a bowling league or other integrated group activity. These promote things like healthy habits, maintaining social and community interactions, reducing anxiety, stress, and behaviors directly related to disability. So we believe that this bill will help restore many of these benefits that are provided by these activities. So thank you very much.
Questions from the senators? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And next on the list, William Walker.
I'll be very brief. Thank you, Chairman Gray and members of the Senate Finance Committee. My name is Will Walker. I live in Hollis with my wife and 24-year-old son with autism. I'm also the legislative liaison for Gateways Community Services out of Nashua. I lead an advocacy group of approximately 280 people and their families. Here's how I'm going to be brief. Everything Representative Stringham said and everything that Mr. Katrubis just said, I agree with 100%. Okay, and I also want you to imagine that you have a disability. and that your only touch point with society is one of these what we so-called recreational activities. Let's say it's karate, okay? And this is your only ability to be integrated in society, in the community. And then imagine now that this is taken away, okay? So your fitness, your inclusion, your friends, your support network are all gone. And what we're looking here to do is to restore that. You've already heard about why it went away. You heard about why we need to do this in a mid-cycle, all right? So it has to be an appropriation and so on. But I just want to say, please support HB 1593. And I agree with everything that Representative Stringham and Mr. Katrubis said.
Questions from the senators? Thank you. Seeing none, thank you very much. Robert Gillis.
Good afternoon, Chairman Gray and members of the Finance Committee. My name is Robert Gillis. My wife Noelle and I live in Hancock, New Hampshire, and I'm the Executive Director for a small disability services provider, Monadnock WorkSource, based in Peterborough in the Monadnock region. I'll also be brief and have written testimony to leave. Many of the folks that our agency supports do not have families that have resources for, discretionary activities. Many of the individuals we support don't have work skills that allow them to earn substantial income to, again, take on activities that are important to all of us. Recreational or diversional activities, which I think some of the wording that federal Medicaid used, are an important part of all of our lives. We don't just wake up, eat, work, go home, eat, and sleep. The community that we're part of, the activities that we participate in are a big part of our life and a big part of community-based living. My organization, Monadnock WorkSource, has been supporting folks in community living for 53 years now, and there are many that would have very limited community interactions and very limited opportunities to just have fun and be part of a like-minded group of people that enjoys some of the same activities that they do. And so I'd like to ask the senators to support HB 5393. And I want to commend the legislature for taking this on because it is a very important part of our disability services delivery system. That was a surprise that's falling through the cracks. And I know it's only a stopgap measure, but it'll make a big difference to the 34 individuals that our organization supports. Thank you.
Questions from the senators? Seeing none, thank you very much. That takes us to the last person who signed up to speak. The number online was 52 in support, 1 opposed.
Can I ask the department a question?
Absolutely, Senator.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman Gray and members of the committee. My name is Melissa Nemeth, and I represent the Department of Health and Human Services.
Thank you. Could you give us a history, please, of when CMS made this change, what the timing was?
So there was a clarification provided by CMS around the end of 2022 when questions were coming up about whether funding could be provided on the waiver for admission to certain activities. Some of the examples were admission to Canopy Lake Park, mini golf, trampoline parks, places of that nature. The department got clarification that it is okay to use the federal waiver dollars for the support staff for the individual at that activity, as well as the transportation to and from that activity, just not the admission to that activity.
So that was a year and a half ago?
Approximately. Additionally, though, the department does have contracts with all of the 10 area agencies, and within those contracts is funding for family support to be utilized for activities in accordance with Administrative Rule HEM 519. And that rule does include as family support opportunities to, I want to get the wording correct, for the promotion of inclusive social and recreational opportunities. So that was an avenue that was available to families to request payment for these services. Although the department is not opposed to working on some more long-term solutions as well. That is a measure that was in place that families could utilize to seek some funding for these services. And as was alluded to by Alex, there are not good data systems on these services, and so it was really hard to identify exactly what had been spent on these. And I do want to point out that the clarification that was received from CMS was to the effect of these never should have been paid for. The technical guide for the waiver specifically excludes recreational and/or diversional activities, and that has been in place for some number of years.
Final follow-up.
Follow-up.
If I could. So could the department have brought this forward last spring during the budget process? Since you've known about it for a year and a half.
That, I guess, potentially. I am not involved in the budgeting process, so I am not familiar with the ins and outs of how that works, so I do apologize for not having that direct information. But the department, as Alex alluded to as well, has been working with advocates and others to try to figure out a solution for this issue.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Seeing none, we will close the public hearing on 1593 and open the next public hearing as soon as we're ready. I don't think so.
Pass that down to Deb, I appreciate it.
Okay. Who's here to introduce Representative Wheeler? Go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Senator Gray, Mr. Chairman, members of the Senate Finance Committee. For the record, I'm Representative Jonah O'Ryan Wheeler. I represent Hillsborough District 33. I'm very briefly here just to introduce the bill and to say, as a student of ComVal, why I introduced this legislation to the House of Representatives this term. Obviously, we all know the ComVal lawsuit and the reasons why this legislation was brought forward. As a student of ComVal and as a graduate in 2021, I know firsthand sort of the ridiculousness of the reality of the situation of how we fund education here in our state. I see, as a student of ComVal, our school, which got good funding based on how big the district is, resulting in those students having good opportunities, many of them, a lot of programs, a good school, to put it bluntly. And then I see 10 minutes down the road in Jaffrey and Rindge, a town where I have many friends because we're only 10 minutes down the road. We live in abutting towns. They have significantly less resources in their school, significantly less opportunities. In fact, they have to come to ComVal to get some of the programs that are offered to them in Conant. And the school culture is significantly worse because of the lack of their funding. Members of the Senate Finance Committee, I introduced this legislation to try and alleviate that dichotomy, to make how we fund education here in our state more level, so that every student in New Hampshire is able to get not just an education, not just a degree with a piece of paper, but a good education that sets them up for the world in which they live today. With that, I will hand it off to the other representatives, Representative Ladd and Luno, who are here and who worked very diligently in a bipartisan way, and I commend them on that work to craft this legislation in a manner that works for our budget and works for the state in this biennium. Thank you.
Questions from the senators?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Senate Committee.
Seeing none, Representative Ladd and Luno. A twofer.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. We're here to speak on behalf of this bill, 1583, Representative Luno and myself. We worked diligently, and I'm from Haverhill, New Hampshire, and Representative Luno is from Hopkinton. Okay, so we're here to support the bill. When this bill initially came to the House, I was asked to put together by the Speaker a committee which involved personnel from finance, from Ways and Means, and policy. We did that, and we looked at this as one of the bills we looked at. We also looked at a bill that dealt with differentiated aid and one that dealt with the statewide education property tax. So we're here today just to talk about 1583, the bill that we have in front of you right now. I passed out a sheet to you, and the first one I'd like to address is working across the formula from left to right, from base cost, right across differentiated aid, which is a part of 1583. This sheet right here, if you see, if you were to date back to 2008, 2009, when Senator Estabrook was involved with putting this formula together based upon inputs, what goes towards what do we need, what inputs we need to have an adequate education. And since that time, we really have not looked at the actual components of that. And as you'll see on the sheet, on the first page where it says teachers on the left in that table, you can see that we looked and found the average cost of a teacher that's starting out in the state of New Hampshire, according to all these negotiated agreements. We have some that are getting paid starting out at $60,000 plus. We have others that are starting out around $31,000, $32,000. The average cost is $42,560. So we base this formula on all those components, taking what the average salaries are for all these parts, and then coming up with the actual universal cost, which is $4,404. That's what we are basing base cost on for the second year of the next biennium. Looking at the second sheet, what you have, it goes down the left-hand side, and it looks at base cost increase. We increased it by, from what we are right now, $222 to get to that level that the average cost of a beginning teacher is $42,560. Then we added in another component, relief grant. That's based on the F&R, from 48% down to 12%. If you're at the 48% level or higher, you will receive $800 per pupil. If you're down as low as the 12%, where you have $200. Below that, you don't receive anything. The fiscal capacity disparity aid on the left-hand side is based upon equalized property valuation per ADMR. And if you're on the max side of that, in other words, if you're at the max part of getting the money, you would be at a $800,000 equalized property valuation or less. And if you're in working up that scale, we've had this type of formula many times before, up to $1.9 million, you would receive up to $900 per. So we put this together in an effort to try to address some of the disparities which we do have, and recognizing that working from base across, and to look at this totally together, you'd also have to look at 1656, which deals with the weighted values which we've stuck in the form for differentiated aid for special education. Recognizing of those 13 IEP categories, they're not all weighted at the same amount. Some take only a half hour every other day, maybe. Others are full-time. Helps offset some of those costs with catastrophic aid. And the third part that we looked at, which you don't have in front of you, was looking at the statewide education property tax, where we have the issue of donor versus, I hate to use that term, donor versus non-donor, where we have coming back in the formula right now about $29 million. Going back, staying with the town that's raising more than is necessary for adequacy. We didn't touch that in this bill at all. And so what we have before you today is the areas which we increased by base cost, and with, you don't have the second part, the differentiated before you today, in recognition that we understand by increasing your base, you're increasing the base for every student throughout this state, every town throughout this state, just not those which are property poor. We tried to address that through some of those other two categories which you have down below that on that table. So I'd like to, ask Representative Luno if he'd like to add anything else on that.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Ladd and members of the committee. Yeah, I'd be happy to.
You need to state your name.
Oh, thank you. David Luno, representing the people of Merrimack District 9, which include folks that live in Hopkinton and Bow. But I say it in all the other committees that where I testify that I like to think we all that we all represent people all across the Granite State, and this is one of those bills that actually touches the outcomes of all students in every school district across the state. So it's something that that is the result of a bipartisan committee that Representative Ladd talked about that met several times this late winter, and basically developed a bill or an amendment to 1583, which has now passed the House twice by strong with strong support from the floor. That really touches on three things. It first increases the what's called a grant based on low income. So it uses uses free and reduced price lunch qualification for that. But it has a grant of let me make sure I find this right, $25 million for basically for districts where they have high populations of people that live in lower or have lower income backgrounds. And this is important because I think one of the things we all recognize is that that's a cost driver for school districts. I mean, fundamentally, it costs more to educate the average student in Manchester to a statewide outcome than it does the average student in Bedford. And largely it's because a lot of these districts have high incidence of low-income families and high needs for that. The second thing it does is introduce fiscal capacity disparity aid, which isn't so much of a cost factor, but it's the ability to access the resources you need to fund your school budget. And some districts don't have to work very hard to do that. I mean, everybody's certainly working hard, but in some districts with tremendous property valuations or maybe lower student counts, that's a little bit easier to do than in other districts across the state, like Pittsfield, like Berlin, and like Claremont. So it brings that in, and I guess finally, it doesn't do anything with respect to the statewide education property tax. Leaves that completely alone. So it really is a school funding fairness bill. It doesn't fix school funding, but it certainly moves it in the right direction. I think it moves it in the right direction that received both strong bipartisan support in the House Select Committee to study school funding and twice now on the House floor. So thank you. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions from senators? Senator Bertzel.
Thank you. Thank you for taking my question. What prompted you to bring it in the middle of a budget period? Because we had the budget last year, and we have a budget coming up next spring. Why not put the formula together? We just changed the formula last year, and now you're looking to change it again.
So thanks for the question. It's not changing the formula, it's adding to it. So, and it adds it over and above the hold harmless that's in there right now, which is obviously being eaten into, and some districts are not seeing the state grant that they were expecting because of the diminishing factors in the current formula. But I'd say two extenuating circumstances drove us to do it this year. One of them being the lawsuits, and that they're, while they're both certainly have been appealed and are stayed by the Supreme Court, that it was an opportunity for the legislature to show the courts that, yeah, we do take our obligation seriously when it comes to funding our public schools. And secondly, the fact that there are resources within the Education Trust Fund expected end-of-year surplus that are more than double what's being looked at for this. So we think it was both a good opportunity to show the court also a good use of taxpayer money to fund our schools. And when you take a look at the fact that property taxpayers all across the state open up their wallets every May to fund their school budgets. They have high expectations on their schools. New Hampshire, in general, does very well as far as student outcomes. The governor cited it during his State of the State address. He cited how New Hampshire's average student performs like second best in the country. But the problem is it's just not happening everywhere. And we've got the financial wherewithal to be able to do something about that now.
I'd like to just, add on to this. If you look at the table that I gave out to you, you can see during the first year, this budget would jump by $64 million over where we are right now. In the second year of the coming biennium, it jumped $99 million. We don't have the costs in this sheet right here for 1656. I know you're not dealing with that, Bill. That would add another $17 million approximately. This is not something new that's been addressed in the House side. We've looked at policy considerations, especially during the times in which we looked at finance back in 2008, 2017, 18 with Karen Umberger, who had chaired that task force which we were on. And again, we did it with the study commission, which we had several years back. And those areas, there were recommendations that came out from that. One was the special education, the differentiated aid amounts, the weighted amounts for special ed need to be put in place here in this state. Whereas we know that there are different costs associated with the type of programming that's provided to each youngster. We also know that the property tax and equalized valuation, the fiscal capacity aid is also necessary to help those towns which really do need that support. And there's many of them throughout this state. I live in one. And we feel it's time that we address this formula a little bit more than we have in the past in terms of what is base cost. We looked at the base cost and we saw that K through 2 was getting X number of dollars. We moved it to K through 3 and put the ratio down to 1 to 25 instead of 1 to 30. And then we've also got grades 4 through 12, which are middle school. Middle school starts in this state in grade 4. The middle school in my town starts at grade 4, goes through grade 8 in high school. So we've tried to revamp that formula to be more representative of what's going on in today's education.
Oh.
Thank you. With regards to the statement you made about showing the courts that we are invested, we made a significant increase last year in the educational funding, and that didn't seem to impact the courts at all. And I'm not confident that raising it, I know I think Derry gets an additional $400 or $4,000 per pupil, I'm not sure which, but I'm not sure that it's going to make an impact in the courts. Any comment on that?
Sure. So obviously, timing is probably, in the sequence of things, I think is relevant here, that the state budget happened during the Conval lawsuit while the litigation was ongoing, and then Conval, the court issued its ruling, its order in that lawsuit. I'm not thinking of it right now. Sometime in February, maybe, when that came out, January or February, and then now this has been subsequent to that. Obviously, the state of New Hampshire can't manufacture money. We don't have money growing on trees, but we do have $200 million as an expected surplus in the Education Trust Fund. And as Representative Ladd, said, the first year cost of this, the draw out of the Education Trust Fund, would be approximately $64 million for this out of the $200 million that's expected to be there. And we think that does send a signal that, given the means that we have to help move school funding in a positive direction that's good for student outcomes in an equitable way that supports kids, is a good signal to the court. And we hope that the court will look at that as maybe as this now enters the state Supreme Court, that should be the lens at which on how the state of New Hampshire goes about funding its schools, through the lens of equity and student outcomes, and not necessarily following the path that we have done so for so long.
Additional questions? Senator Radner.
So thank you very much for taking my question. I think you answered my first question, how you pay for it. You've got the Education Trust Fund. I'm assuming that the budget that you sent us last year, you both voted to already gut the Education Trust Fund by deleting all the surplus from it. So now you're back at it again. Is that correct?
No, I don't think that bill has not passed. It was actually.
No,
thank you. That's right. That's right. Senate removed that, and then that was introduced a week ago. No, 3 weeks ago as a standalone bill, or it was moved to take it off the table. It's been tabled in the House. So, and no, I do not support eviscerating the Education Trust Fund.
But aren't you doing it with this amendment with no new source of revenue to pay for this?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And we're not tapping.
Would you take and add up the three numbers that are on the fiscal note and tell me what those are?
Go right here. So the fiscal note actually has 61 million for the first year,
and
74 for the second year, and 67 in the third year. And we know that the revenues that filter into the Education Trust Fund are producing in excess of $200 million over biennium against those numbers. So those numbers don't come anywhere to drawing to a zero or into negative what's currently funneled into that.
To try to be the mediator here.
Yeah.
Certainly, if I look at Senator Bradley's position, that with the income and outgo that we have into the trust fund right now, that it certainly appears to me that those expenses of 61, 74, 63 would be additional expenses if I keep everything else. And that, I'm sure, is the sentiment where Senator Bradley gets that by the end of that 3 years, the Education Trust Fund will be zero.
I had part two of the question.
All right, cheers.
So it would appear to both Senator Gray and myself, you've gutted the Education Trust Fund, but you've only raised the base adequacy by $300, which is about 10% of what the court ordered. How is that going to convince the court of any kind of good faith, which is what I think you both testified to?
So when we're increasing the base, it's really not directing the money which you're putting in that base to the schools which need that money. Now, just because the courts have said you need to put $7,000+ per pupil into that base, is that what we're going to do? We've increased the base, we've used solid figures to discern that's what our universal cost is. Now let's address the other components of like differentiated aid, which we know that the costs of doing business in special education, each year when you're looking at special ed aid or catastrophic aid, we have districts coming back saying, I don't have the money to support the child that just moved into our community. Where am I going to find that dollar? And granted, the student that's been home placed or in a hospital or in residential placement, we're funding at $7,000+ per pupil. That's not going to take care of the whole load, but it may unload some of that money on CAD aid and bring it in that area. So we're going to have the differentiated aid plus that base totaling up to X number of dollars. We're moving closer to that mark. Whether we get there or not, we're making that effort and trying to discern if that getting to that mark is really where we want to be to begin with.
Follow up? One last question. So would you agree with me that in reading the court decision, which has been appealed, that ordered 7356, that the order is for base adequacy to be at 7356, but there's no order for differentiated aid? So, if I were a future legislature looking at this, one way of funding 7356 would be to cut out all differentiated aid. What would that do to towns like yours in Haverhill, for instance?
I would assume that would not help my town. And the dollars that when we're looking at the court order, I'm looking at adequacy. I'm not looking at base costs. Everything adequacy is base plus those three components of differentiated aid. If you were to total all the money that's going to these towns, we're getting pretty close to what the court had ordered, close to $7,000 per pupil. But we are a state where we're actually supporting those schools which need it, really need it. And Haverhill Woodsville is one of those communities.
Well, wouldn't you agree with me that the court order does not require differentiated aid? And if that stands in the Supreme Court, there would be a number of loser towns, including some of the towns that you and I have worked the hardest. Those that need the help the most would be the biggest losers.
I believe that our task is to provide the opportunity for an adequate education to all students, to every student. And it doesn't just stop at base cost. And so I'm not going to make any references to what the court has said or plans to do, but I believe that we're moving in the right direction. We have to be supporting those communities which need it. And if we throw it all in the base cost, we're not going to achieve our end. It can't do it. We have to be starting to think what's on the right-hand side of that column. Whether we're going to start dealing with the various grants which we have out there right now, which don't come under adequacy. We have also retained a bill within the House dealing with the foundation formula, which we know we have to look at. So I would say this is a step in the right direction. Hopefully it may stay something. However, I think we're going in the right direction.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, and just to that point, and to Senator Birdsall's earlier question too, and I think I'd mentioned that 1583 is now passed by the House twice, does direct money to where it's needed, and we do think this is a good signal, hopefully to the court, that there are equitable ways of using precious state dollars, which are limited, clearly, to the best way for funding our public schools. And while this is only $64 million in the first year and $71 million in the second year, which is a long way from what the state spends in public schools, that it's showing that the legislature can do it in a way that really makes a difference for school districts and puts the money where it's needed, and hopefully the court, as they move forward with the appeal, will also recognize that as a way forward. Thank you.
Additional questions from the senators? Seeing none, thank you.
I just have one further comment, if you don't mind, Senator Gray, that we have a funding problem, but more so, we have a distribution problem. And I think that's exactly what we ought to be addressing, how we're distributing the dollars which we have. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Representative Davis. While she's coming up, there's at least 4 of you signed up from Manchester School Board. I would rather you all come up at once and one person speak or something to try and move this along. So if you want to kibitz, while she's speaking, that would be a good thing. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senators. Once again, Representative Hope Damon, Sullivan District 8, 9 towns or 8 towns in the city of Claremont. I live in Croydon. I know what happens when school budgets get drastically cut, or what could have happened. I won't repeat that whole 2022 saga for you folks, but it certainly alerted many people to pay closer attention to how we fund our schools and what the value of that is. I want to just emphasize that in this funding structure, no community gets less resources than they presently get. Every community either stays the same or has an increase in funding. And just to respond to Senator Birdsall's inquiry about, and I'll try to paraphrase you accurately, if the court didn't pay attention to the improvements in funding last year, why would they pay attention to the improvements proposed here? I think part of it is that it remains still far below what the court has defined as adequacy. So it's a step in the right direction, but it's not meeting what the court said in their initial findings. I want to just remind everybody, this isn't just dollars. Dollars matter, we have limited resources, we have to be smart about them, but it's about investment. These are kids who are going to be the future people sitting here doing all the tasks of our society. We need to fund adequately for them to be capable. I believe it's 87% of students in New Hampshire attend public schools. And for the most part, families and kids like their public schools and they want more funding. So I just won't get into the weeds of the numbers, but will really urge you to seriously consider and support this very important legislation. Thank you.
Questions from the senators?
Sorry.
Seeing none, thank you very much. Manchester School Board.
It's okay, we'll have 2 and 2, so we can save you some time.
Again, the important things are that you not repeat things and that you speak quickly.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you very much. My name is Sean Parr. I'm on the Manchester School Board where I chair the Education Legislation Committee. I'm here with my colleague.
Hi, my name is Liz O'Neill. I'm a school board representative in Manchester for Ward 11, and I'm a teacher here, here in Concord at Concord High School.
We are here in support of HB 1583. We are authorized by the Manchester School Board to advocate for this bill and for fully funding education in New Hampshire. Manchester joined the plaintiffs in the Conval lawsuit, and as you've discussed, that lawsuit has ruled in favor of increasing the base adequacy education. And as you've been discussing, there is a distribution issue, and Manchester is one of those towns, cities, that has borne some of that difficulty. Manchester is New Hampshire's most populous, most diverse, and most impoverished student body, and yet we are at the bottom of the state for school funding, spending $15,044 per student. That's over $4,000 less per student than the average. And with over 12,000 students, we would need an additional $50 million in order to raise our spending level to this average amount. And this is the definition of chronic underfunding. We're very grateful for the boost of funding granted during the last budget cycle. It is and will do wonders for our students, but it does not get the state to where it needs to be to have a fully funded system. Now that the state has taken that first step and the Conval ruling has substantiated the dire need to increase aid and change the adequacy formula, it's time to take those next steps, revise the formula, and fully fund New Hampshire schools. We need to increase funding, particularly to those districts with the greatest need, and this is another reason why we're here today, to reiterate the fact that Manchester is such a district. As the largest, most diverse district in the state, we have over 50% of our students qualifying for free and reduced meals, and with about 25% of our students qualifying for special education services. Fully funding education in New Hampshire is desperately needed, and thank you very much for your consideration.
I won't repeat what Sean has already said, so I just wanted to add that the lack of adequate funding provided by the state creates a burden for communities. Education is a right, and it is wholeheartedly disappointing to see this right reduced to a burden. So often we hear community members in Manchester frustrated with both their taxes and the growing list of improvements needed by the city schools. This community that we serve is vibrant. The students in both Concord and Manchester represent the best that New Hampshire has to offer, and the children and families in these communities deserve a government that invests in them. Educators across the state do this every day, and it's your turn now to stand up for them. Thank you for your time.
Questions from the senators? Senator Bradley.
So, thank you very much. I'm glad you recognized that Manchester received, I think it was about $30 million more in the budget that we just passed last year when we raised adequacy. I guess my question is, if we were to pass this bill, would you recommend that Manchester pull out of the Conval lawsuit?
I mean, I would say no. I think that it's a good next step there, but there are still a lot of issues with funding and with the formula, and Manchester's been chronically underfunded for such a long time that this is going to move the needle a bit more in the right direction there. And we see every day how hard our superintendent, who is also here with us, works to make sure that we do as much as we can with less than other towns and cities there. And I think that it's going to take a fully funded system to really move the needle to where it needs to be for our city and what our students deserve.
Additional questions? Seeing none? Thank you very much. The rest of the Manchester School Board, and apparently the superintendent. And remember, we're not repeating, right?
Correct. Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Camille Gillis, and I am the Superintendent of Schools for the Manchester School District. I am joined by...
I'm Jim O'Connell. I'm the Vice Chair of the Manchester Board of School Committee.
Ours is the largest school district in the state with more than 12,000 students and around 2,000 employees, which also makes us one of the largest employers within the state. In the 2 years that I have been in the role of superintendent, we have focused our work in 3 key areas: educational programming, staffing, and facilities, as we work to build and sustain a high-performing school district. We have worked diligently to intervene and help students recover learning loss during the COVID-19 pandemic, and we're beginning to see positive signs of improvement in assessment data. We have lowered class sizes, added new curriculum, and expanded opportunities to access higher level learning. Through new collective bargaining agreements and support at the district office, we have placed a premium on recruiting and retaining the best possible staff. And we've undertaken a generational overhaul of our school facilities to ensure our students have access to modern learning environments. We are taking massive steps forward for our students, staff, and families in our entire community. While I'm not here today to solely brag about our district's work in progress, I am here to talk about educational funding. Manchester School District remains one of the lowest funded districts on a per pupil basis, despite being one of the largest and most diverse districts in the state. Despite this, we have moved the district forward by leveraging every dollar of our funding to maximize learning opportunities for our students. We know and understand per pupil funding must increase to truly provide for the dynamic needs of our students. We support the proposed increased base annual cost for an adequate education as stipulated in HB 1583, and we ask this committee to support this important legislation.
Thank you, Dr. Gillis, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. So, Senator, I'm sorry, again, Jim O'Connell, I'm the Vice Chair of the Manchester Board of School Committee. Senator Bradley asked a question about the funding, the additional funding that had come to Manchester recently, which was like oxygen to a person needing air. And there's no question that that had an effect in the city of Manchester. But let me give you an example of some of the things that allowed us to do in the last 2 or 3 years. We had our custodial workers in Manchester, I think it's 107, give or take one, who were earning $9.10 per hour. I described it as immoral in the state of New Hampshire, a stain on the city of Manchester. But we were able to raise their pay to $15 an hour. That's a real effect of having additional funding. People weren't being paid $9.10 per hour because there was an unfeeling nature to what was going on in Manchester. The money just simply wasn't there. When we look at the expansion in our special needs, I want our special needs students to get, as we all do, I'm sure, to get all the services they need in order to live the best lives they can. And yet, the cost of special education in the city of Manchester has been growing. Just one small number to help to illustrate that might be that in the city of Manchester, in the coming year, we expect to spend about $4 million transporting students to our schools. Of course, that's not all of them, but our regular students, about $4 million. We expect to spend about $12 million on minivans and minibuses transporting students who are of special needs. That number has risen exponentially, and I use the word exponentially advisedly. It has multiplied a number of times in the last 4 or 5 years. Those are real costs. So I admire the work of the bipartisan nature of the work coming before this committee with the work of Mr. Ladd and Mr. Luno. As we've heard, it's passed the House twice. We've seen a great effort was done, as you know, in the last 3 years. Governor Sununu appointed a commission to oversee fair funding and funding of the schools and education in the state of New Hampshire. And it was clear that the issue was about fairness, was about the way in which the funding was being distributed. In response again to Senator Bradley's question regarding, from an earlier speaker, Senator Bradley, with regard to the what would happen if a decision was made by a future legislature to eliminate funding other than the base adequacy, well, it would be catastrophic in actual fact because our more costly students, our homeless students, our special education students, our English language learner students, our refugee students, of which we have many, are vastly more expensive to educate than others. And one more thing, if I could, Mr. Chairman. I came hot foot this morning from an event at a school, Smith Road School, elementary school in the city of Manchester, where there was an event going on. It was a general assembly for kindergarten through 5th grade, and there were 400 or so kids in an auditorium, and it was a lot of it that was very commendable. But I saw there individual students who had individuals, paraprofessionals, helping them to be able to cope with, just to walk up and get a certificate or something, or to be brought to the bathroom. The amount of dynamism in that room, as opposed to a room where you had an assembly of students who were all there without any special needs, without special accommodations. And it was visible, and I see individuals walking out with little boys and girls, holding them by the hand and bringing them in and out for services. That all costs money. And frankly, in the city of Manchester, something that preys on me constantly is that we don't have the ability to put the services, all the services in place that those young boys and girls, citizens of the state of New Hampshire deserve. I know your job is difficult, but I would urge you to disassociate, as a finance committee, the issue of simply looking at the funds in terms of the $200 million in the reserve fund and the 64 or 71 that will come out in the next biennium, by leaving 70 million in that trust fund, again, to be topped up in the next biennium. But I would ask you to try to disassociate that, or at least be cognizant of the fact that there are real human beings, little human beings, that the decisions have a big effect upon, and we need the resources, more resources than we have, more resources possibly than the citizens of New Hampshire will ever be able to afford, perhaps, in the fullness. We know we can't do everything, but I'd urge you to do the minimum you could do. I think passing this bill and allowing it to go forward would be the minimum we could do. Thank you.
Questions from senators? Senator Bradley.
So just doing back of the envelope, your current grant's about $110 million. You educate 12,000 students, which means what you're actually receiving on a per-student basis is about $9,200. So I'm glad you agree with me on the importance of differentiated aid. The judge's ruling does not call for differentiated aid.
If I could respond, Senator, in my limited understanding as a non-attorney of the rulings of the New Hampshire courts, I believe you're correct. But I would correct you on one thing. When you talk about 12,000 students in the city of Manchester, we supply substantial services at great cost to private schools, charter schools, home schools, especially when it comes to special education. We have people employed full-time in our administration whose only job is to, we just hired somebody the other day at somewhere around 80, 90,000. I don't remember the exact number, so don't hold me to it. We hired another administrator to administer the management of special education in private and Catholic and charter schools, which is not part of the number that you're using there. So I would only caution that taking the total amount of money in the city of Manchester and dividing it by the current number of students who are actually in the public schools, you would need to add significant numbers for the many buses that travel every day and the bus drivers in them, bringing students to private schools, etc.
And all I would say in response, Mr. Chairman, I don't mean to be argumentative, but Manchester and Representative Senator Rosenwald's town of Nashua were the two biggest winners in the funding formula that we just authorized last year, which put a lot of new money into differentiated aid while we also increased base adequacy.
And I would finish by saying this, thank you, Senator, that I recognize that. I think when I talked about how we were able to lift the minimum wage from people cleaning bathrooms at nighttime from a ludicrous $9.10 to $5, and that was done by that was done because of additional funding that we were able to get. So I think we can both be correct here. I don't think it's argumentative. Thank you.
Additional questions from the senators? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Werner Horn.
Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Werner Horn. live in Franklin, and I'm here to support House Bill 1583. So I was a member of House Finance. I was here for 6 years. Franklin meant that education funding is a subject that I needed to learn a lot about in a very short period of time. A couple of things became really apparent. There's a constitutional mandate that the state provides for an adequate education, and for decades, the General Court has done as little as humanly possible to live up to that constitutional mandate. 4 years ago, adequacy was about 25% of what it took to educate a student here in New Hampshire. And I think we can all agree that 25% of something is not adequate. You can't drive your car on one wheel. You can't live in your house with one wall. So 4 years later, the idea that $4,100, roughly 20% of what it takes to educate a student in New Hampshire, according to the numbers I've recently seen, that's 20%. How did we go backwards? The court cases are irrelevant to this situation. And they are irrelevant to this situation because it is very, very clear the state budget is the sole prerogative of the General Court. We do not owe the court system anything. So the cases that are in front of the court are good for sound bites, and that's about it. So this isn't about satisfying the court. This isn't about adhering to whatever the Supreme Court says or whatever the Superior Courts say. This is about, are we doing what we need to be doing to educate students in New Hampshire? Now, if you give every school district $10K per student, there are communities in New Hampshire who will gold plate their superintendent's office. It represents a waste of resources. That's not what I'm advocating. When you have an adequacy formula based in bad faith, as this one is, the idea that your basis for teacher pay is the average of a first-year teacher, that means no school district has anything other than first-year teachers. That's not a realistic number. Most of our school districts, thank God, are the benefit of teachers who have dedicated decades to their craft. People who are intending to assign decades to their craft. These are not first-year teachers, so therefore the adequacy formula should not have that number based on first-year teachers. So now that we know that the adequacy formula is based in bad faith, the idea comes to how do we properly support students? So if you postulate that certain communities can adequately educate their students based on the $4,100 number, okay, but the characteristics of what a student looks like when they're learning in the schools isn't the same community over community. We know through various data that a student who is in food insecurity does not learn as efficiently as a student who had a warm breakfast in their house before they came to school that day. The term ACEs refers to adverse childhood events. Children who have ACEs in their childhood do not learn as efficiently as children who have had none of those events in their past. The community I represented of Franklin, too many students have either had a family member arrested, they've seen a dead body, or they don't have two parents in the house. There are adults who have problems with all three of these issues, but adults have the resources to do something about it. They can get counseling, among other things. Students, children have none of those resources. They can't decide on their own.
We need to get back to the bill. We're going quite far from the bill, please.
I appreciate that, Senator Gray, but the context is important because I've heard a lot of distractions here this afternoon. Distractions about what about court cases, distractions about what about
Get
the
back-
total of,
If you don't get back to the bill, your time will be expired.
I'm going to reference the bill right now, Senator.
Hope so.
Somebody asked a representative to add up the numbers that's going to impact this bill, as if adding up the numbers is somehow a justification for not doing the right thing. So differentiated aid, which is what I was getting to, is important because it recognizes and awards resources based on demonstrated need. Children who have these events in their makeup don't learn as efficiency. It makes sense, therefore, if we're going to adequately educate them as well as others, that we devote the additional resources the differentiated represents to help achieve the same educational outcome as somebody who doesn't have to struggle with these. So the conversation is about doing the right thing by our students. The bill comes now because now we had an opportunity to bring it forward and address those issues that are normally addressed as part of a state budget biennium. That's why this is here. The intent is to do, in some small manner, what we should have been doing for decades, what we failed to do 4 years ago. And that is to look intelligently at the adequacy formula, to understand the role differentiated aid plays, and to allocate resources to address student adequacy.
Questions from senators? Thank you very much. David?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Senator Gray and members of the committee. My name is David Trumbull. I'm from the town of Ware. I support this bill for a couple reasons. First is that public school funding is both a constitutional duty and an investment in our state. The Claremont decision was constitutionally based. It wasn't just something from a court. The Constitution said that it's the state's job to educate our children, not our town's job, and that the state must guarantee the funding. It's an investment in our state because the benefits of education flow throughout the state. A child doesn't stay in their town forever. They leave their town and go on. So the benefits flow to the state. Over 85% of children in this state go to public schools. They grow up to be over 85% of voters. They are the essence of our democracy. They grow up to be over 85% of the workforce. They are the essence of our state's economy. Without a strong public school system, we won't have an economy or a democracy. Now, the court said it's the state's job to fund all of education, and yet we are the least percentage state funded in all 50 states in this country. 70% of the bill is paid by the local towns. Over 80% for special ed is paid by the towns. The $130 million in this bill over 2 years is $60 million a year. The Conval decision, the court said we need to come up with $500 million a year. So this bill would basically cover about 10% of what Conval is looking for. We still have a long way to go, but it is a step in the right direction. Second, additional funds do produce results. There are tens of thousands of children in New Hampshire who live in school districts, either who are in property poor towns or have a lot of low-income families. You've heard from the school board people already today. With more funding, the schools can keep their good teachers, reduce their class sizes, provide reading specialists, offer world language courses and AP courses. Professor Jackson from Northwestern University and the National Bureau of Economic Research did a study of 32 studies on increased school funding. They found that for every $1,000 of additional funding, if held for 4 years, increases test scores by 3% and high school graduation rates by 2%. If we were to actually live up to Conval's decision, we would see our graduation rate go up 10% in this state and our test scores go up 10% in this state. And Professor Jackson said the results apply across all income levels and are significantly higher for low-income students. I'll conclude with what's going on in my town, which is the town of Ware. It's not a poor town, but it's a property poor town because almost 95% of our tax base is residential. This bill would give us about $718,000 more, which would be about $600 more per pupil. The problem we're facing in our town is that our teachers' salaries are $10,000 to $20,000 less than neighboring towns. After 2 years, teachers learn classroom management skills. 70% leave our town. We don't have the resources to have an adequate mentor program. We don't have the resources to have adequate intervention programs like reading programs in our town. We need more resources. New Hampshire schools are a tale of two cities. Those that live in towns that have enough resources who can make up the difference for the state's failure to live up to its constitutional duty, and those who live in towns who can't make up for the state's failure to live up to its constitutional duty. I urge you to start looking at education not as a line item, not as an expense, not as, well, how can we possibly cut it more, but rather it's an investment in our future. If you run a small business, you know there are necessary expenses and you have to pay them, and there are investments to have a good future. If we don't fund our public schools, our state will not have a good future. Thank you.
Questions from the senators? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Kathy Hubert?
Thank you. I have a very scratchy voice, so I apologize. I'm Kathy Hubert, resident of Newport. I'm advocating today for Newport, Claremont, and Charlestown, the three largest communities in Sullivan County. These towns and cities are among the top 10% of property tax communities in the state for decades. I want to add that the Senate bill passed last year. I am glad it benefited Manchester and Nashua. Newport only got 2% increase in funding, $275,000. It was something, but it did not meet what we needed. I wanted to add that. The House bill was much more beneficial. Why is HB 1583 crucial to our town? It directs the funds directly to the state's most vulnerable towns. Newport, average family median income, $68,000, 23% below the state. 48% of our children qualify for free and reduced lunch. Why do we have a hard time raising educational resources? We have nearly 40% less than the statewide average equalized property value. What does this mean for Newport? Our school is labeled by the state, Richards, in need of improvement. Our high school and junior high is ranked lowest in the state. We cannot pay our teachers and retain our teachers. Want to hear our reality? Newport High School has one certified English teacher for 300 kids. Our freshmen are leaving at noon. We can't offer them classes. Out of the 97 teacher positions, 38 are non-certified. We are having difficulty meeting our federal and state law obligations with our special need children. We cannot put paras in front of them because we don't pay as much as the local fast food restaurant. That is our reality. Despite our best efforts, this year's proposed budget had a 3% increase, a total of $425,000. Where did this increase come from? 12% health insurance for our staff, and the rest was just moderate raises for our paraprofessionals and our teachers to try to retain them. The budget failed. Newport taxpayers would have to pay an additional $1 increase in our local school tax. That's a 10% increase for some of the poorest people in New Hampshire. Why is HB 1583 important next year? It will give us $655,000. You just heard we only we could survive if we would have got $425,000. We couldn't raise it. So that $655,000 would increase revenue, address some immediate budget needs, stabilize tax rates, and mitigate further staff attrition. I'm saying we are hemorrhaging here. Well, it's not a long-term solution. It's a crucial step forward in breaking the cycle of decline. I share this story not seeking sympathy. We are proud people, hard-working people in Newport, Claremont, and Charlestown. We manage our resources. But we urge you, as elected officials, to uphold your oath and restore our constitutional right to a fair and state adequately funded education. And if it takes lawsuits, we're on them. We'll go right to the Supreme Court. Get it done.
Do the senators have any questions? No, sir. Seeing none, thank you very much. John Mulhern.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Lunn. I support this bill. I'm a plaintiff in the Rand versus the state of New Hampshire. Why? I'm 66 years old. My wife is 74 years old. We live in Newport, where the cost of education on our property tax bill could cost us our retirement, our health care, and at the rate it is climbing, possibly our home. I am one of a large and growing constituency of older residents in this state that can't afford to support education at the cost of our own personal survival. I met the age of Medicare last year. The savings I gained from leaving private health care were eaten by a $900 increase in my property tax bill due to a flip reassessment that pushed our school tax through the roof. By reverse reassessment, I mean the residential homes were assessed higher than businesses because of our stagnant local economy. Who is this fair to if I can't support increases in school funding? Not our teachers. They are among the lowest paid in the states. Certainly not the students who have large class sizes, canceled curriculums because there are no teachers available, and not special ed kids who are required to have mandated paras in the classroom. Finally, the town does not benefit from our crumbling education when the businesses are reluctant to move in. I don't benefit either because the tax rate will keep going up. In a poverty-stricken and aging town like Newport, we find ourselves in a death spiral. If I don't give my vote and my wallet to the increased costs, I must postpone my retirement indefinitely. I pray that my health doesn't decline and that my cancer never returns. My wife's age is increasing. My wife's age increases our healthcare costs and risks. There are bound to be unaccounted medical and personal expenses that we both face. So should we sacrifice our home for the sake of educating children that our state government refuses to sufficiently fund? This is what so many elderly are facing across New Hampshire. Meanwhile, just 5 miles to the east of my home is the town of Sunapee. Simply because they have a growing economy due to their summer residence around the lake, their schools thrive and their homeowners have much lower taxes. New Hampshire is one of the top 10 wealthiest states in the U.S. You wouldn't know it by the conditions of many towns and schools. Why has our own government sued to perpetuate this dysfunctional system? Why does our legislature, having the power to put things right, knowing the remedy through several fairly adjudicated court decisions and impartial studies, continue to avoid funding education fairly? It is shameful that in a state this wealthy that you would treat our children so poorly. I apologize for being blunt, but when I first got involved with this problem in my 30s, I never imagined that I would still be arguing for equal funding of childhood education that every other U.S. state and every other country in the Western world recognizes as a human right into my retirement years. I would add, as a response to Senator Bradley, that because the court recommends a $7,300 increase does not imply that we should cut money elsewhere. To suggest that as an option misses the point that too many schools are underfunded and the state needs to step up to its constitutional responsibility. I sincerely hope that you will support HB 1583 and demonstrate the time has come for all of us to start collectively looking after our kids and after each other. Thank you.
Questions from the senators? Seeing none, thank you. Donna Magoon?
Thank you so much for having me today. I appreciate this opportunity to speak. I'm probably going to do mine a little bit different on how I'm going to address things, but I want to give you a day in the life of a staff member or a teacher. First student enters last night. Their parent was arrested. Second student evicted from their home. Third student lives with their 18-year-old brother or their grandparents. Fourth, reports abuse to you from a parent or a family member. And the fifth parent committed suicide. The sixth student held their younger sister while she passed away in her arms. This is just a few events that have taken place in the last 5 months, and this is only a few in my school district. This is Tuesday, and I have already had to read 4 DCYF reports of children that are being abused. Welcome to the Newport School District. Now, I'm not saying to you that this happens to all of our families, but I'm saying it's a large majority of my students that are undergoing this. I currently have 801 students. Out of my 801 students, 213 of them are on an IEP. 163 of them are on a 504 plan. That's 47% of my population is receiving extra services. 52% of my students receive free and reduced lunch. I want to talk about all of these things because it's a huge impact. This is what our staff go through on a daily basis. My teachers at step 1 this year make $37,379. Next year, they'll make $38,126. That's what they're at step 1 as a bachelor's degree. I'm going to jump years ahead. Step 18. Now, if you've been in the school district for, say, 25 years, you're still on step 18. You will make, and this is with your master's plus 15 years, you'll make $62,686. That's over 18 years in the school system. This year, I did a proposed budget of $22,601,710. This was my proposed budget and my support staff raises. It did not pass. So my default budget is $21 million. I need to cut my budget by $717,261 from an already district that is in severe need. I also put forward to get a $3,000 step increase per teacher. That was also defeated. So my teachers will not be receiving, they'll be receiving a slight percentage raise, which would be, like I said to you, going from $37,000 to $38,000 next year. I currently have 38 staff members who are on an alternative plan, which means they have not gone the regular route for an educator, which becomes very hard in our district. One of the things that I do is I meet with every single school district. By the way, my name is Donna Magoon. I'm the superintendent of the Newport School District. I meet with every single one of my new staff, and I have conversations with them of how hard it is to work in our district, and that they're going to hear and they're going to see things that are going to be heart-wrenching. And, you know, that's the expectation. The turnover rate last year when I became the superintendent, I had to fill over 27 seats. I had 27 teachers that I needed to fill in my district of 801 students. I had no 8th grade team. Out of 4 teachers, I had 1 in my 8th grade team. So my 6th and 7th grade teachers had to fill in during their prep periods to cover those class times. I currently still am missing teachers in my district, and here we are coming to the end of the year. And what I will share with you is that this is a very scary time for me because it's the time when my contracts go out and when my contracts have to come back. We do amazing trainings in our district that allow our staff to go elsewhere and get paid a lot more money. Neighboring towns pay up to $10,000 more than we. So I ask you, please, to support this bill to help our students and to help our staff. We know that our students need the security. They don't have it, a lot of them don't have it at home, and they really need it, and a lot of them find their security in their teachers. But when we have a turnover rate, as we do in Newport, we're not even able to do that for our students. So I please ask for your support in moving this forward. Thank you so much.
Questions from the senators? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.
Maybe Michelle Fairsley?
Good afternoon, and thank you for taking time for my testimony. I am Michelle Vesey, the Executive Director of New Hampshire Businesses for Social Responsibility. We are here in favor of this bill, but I want to talk more broadly about the economic impact that this is having on our state. We are unable to hire all of the people that we need in order for our businesses to thrive. When our businesses are growing, revenues are growing. That means the state's revenues are growing. When we're not able to find enough people to fill our jobs, people who are qualified, we can't grow at the rate that we need to. New Hampshire has the opportunity to remain a leader, but we need to invest in our education. I appreciate the fact that you're all trying to work with a limited budget, but it is going to have a long-term consequence on the state, and we need to be realistic about that. If we're not going to invest in our children, all of our children, including the children in Newport, who we desperately need, we are not going to be prepared to continue to grow our economy. And that is short-sighted. That is unacceptable for all of us. So I hope that you will pass 1583, and I hope that you will give consideration to the fact that there are a lot of people depending on this, not just our kids, but most importantly our kids, but our economic future. A lot of us look the same. We're gray-haired, we're ready to retire, or already in retirement. Our state is aging. We need our kids, and we need them to stay here. So please consider passing 1583. And I will distribute a letter from our organization.
Questions from the senators? Seeing none, thank you very much. Chris Biso again.
I think I got the right bill now. Good afternoon, Senator Gray, members of the committee. My name is Chris Biso. I am the Director of Special Education for the Mascoma Valley Regional School District. I am representing here today, representing the New Hampshire Association of Special Education Administrators. We are an organization of 280 strong special education administrators who represent both public school and private schools throughout New Hampshire. And we are collectively in favor of moving this bill forward for a couple of different reasons, some, all of which I think we've heard this afternoon. You know, we've touched on HB 1583 would be adding $60 million into the aid to school districts with low property values and high numbers of free and reduced eligible students. This has a significant impact through our lens for students with disabilities who are on individual education plans. We all know, and we've heard this afternoon, that this has received bipartisan support from the Special Subcommittee of Education Funding and the House Finance Division. And we also know that this doesn't solve the funding issues that we have in the state, but it does take a small and meaningful step forward, especially for funding for students with disabilities. The important piece for this, the kids that we are working with are getting more complex, and they're getting more, if we look at autism, for instance, back in 2017, autism was being diagnosed in our students 1 in 68. 2024, that number is 1 in 36. So the students that we're getting are extremely complex. And again, this does not solve our school funding, but it certainly is a step in the right direction, and certainly helps our most complex kids throughout the state.
Questions from the senators? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Yep, thank you.
We're up to the top of the second page. It looks like Renflo Hebert, hyphenated name?
She left.
She's gone, okay.
Sure.
Okay. Zach Sheehan.
Good afternoon. My name is Zach Sheehan. I'm the Executive Director of the School Funding Fairness Project. I appreciate the opportunity to give testimony in support of 1583. I will try to skip through pieces that have been already hit. I do want to just give some big picture, a few additional numbers to add context to why it's important to move forward with 1583. Both property taxes and school funding have been brought up so far. To give a little bit of idea of a range, just last year, local education tax rates, including SWEPT, ranged from $1.21 in Millsfield to $15.79 just for the education piece of the property tax bill. That is contributing, as you've heard, to some communities really struggling to pay for specific and necessary elements for their school districts. Over 70% of all revenue from Forest Public Schools comes from local property taxpayers, as well over $2 billion a year that we as local property taxpayers are currently paying for our education system. It creates wild disparities in offerings as well. For example, last year, Pittsfield had 0 AP offerings, AP class offerings, while Windham has as many as 23. Starting salaries ranged in Stratford from $41,000 to $88,000 in Stratham. Average SAT scores from Manchester West averaging at 905 to 1283 in Hanover. And these outcomes and disparities have dramatic effects on the ability of students to go to post-secondary education, wherever they might want to go after graduating. Graduation rates range from 64% in Manchester West to 97% in Campbell over a 7-year period. A few notes on the lawsuits that have been brought up so far. Just want to clarify that the Conval lawsuit, one of the pieces, as was mentioned multiple times, it was focused on base adequacy. It was looking at base adequacy. It was just focused on base adequacy, trying to understand how much could be funded and paid for on the low amount that is currently being given from the state. The court did address the kind of opposition that has arisen from the legislature to a court overstepping potentially its bounds, and acknowledged that this is a really politically charged issue. And the Superior Court was ordered by the Supreme Court to give a number, to come up with a number that base adequacy needs to be, and it's up to the legislature to likely be higher than that. There are several different interpretations about that court's ruling, but it's not up for interpretation.
We need to talk to the bill, not the court ruling. So let's get back to the bill, please.
All right. This bill, as you've heard, would add about $100 million to communities that need it most. Relative to differentiated aid, which this bill is kind of adding on to, the RAND lawsuit will have a hearing this September that will address differentiated aid specifically, so that will be an element coming up in the fall. I'll leave the last pieces of my testimony. I will just add on also that if there's any way that we can help the committee with additional data or support, we'd be happy to provide any additional resources.
Questions from the senators? Seeing none, thank you very much. Byron Chapkin?
Chapkin.
Okay. Couldn't tell whether it was an L or a K at the end,
It's because I have terrible penmanship, and I apologize. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and senators. As the senator said, my name is Byron Champlin, and I am honored to be the mayor of your capital city. I want to thank you for your commitment to governing our state and for the privilege of testifying before you today. I come to speak in support of House Bill 1583 as passed by the House in February. Concord loves being New Hampshire's capital, and we enjoy the many benefits of hosting state government. At the same time, as a result of the property owned by the state, by nonprofits who see benefits to being located in the capital city, and our own local nonprofits, Concord has the highest percentage of untaxed property of any municipality in New Hampshire. Between 25 and 30% of property is off of our tax rolls. This is a way of saying that the funding, the additional education funding proposed by this legislation would be very welcome as a way of blunting the impact of the cost of educating our children on the property taxpayers of the city. The increased base adequacy aid payments proposed in House Bill 1583 will be a step towards addressing the impact on taxpayers in both of Concord's 2 school districts. By dipping into the state surplus for the increase, we're hoping that you will ensure that House Bill 1583 does not further affect our local property taxpayers. And you'll also be helping to ensure a healthy educational system for our state's children. I join 11 of New Hampshire's 13 mayors in endorsing this legislation, and I ask you to endorse an ought-to-pass recommendation on House Bill 1583 as you reported out of committee. Thank you very much.
Questions from the senators?
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much. Desiree McLaughlin?
This is on, okay. Good afternoon, Chairman Gray and Senate Finance Committee. My name is Desiree McLaughlin, and I am the mayor of Franklin. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to testify before you in support of this bill 1583. If this bill passes, it will greatly help the children of the Franklin School District who desperately need it. The city of Franklin is home to several marginalized demographics experiencing poverty, and 58% of our school population is on the free and reduced lunch program. Our special education accounts for 30% of our budget. Currently, our per pupil cost is just under $20,000 per pupil, in the state providing the $4,101 per pupil. The difference between those two is a very large number, and our children do suffer for it. In addition, this year, the district was hit with an increased unanticipated cost in our special education budget that exceeded the budget by almost $1 million from students moving into our city that had special education needs and requirements. And I understand this is being experienced by other school districts across New Hampshire, but Franklin's budget is extremely restricted. If this bill passes, it could offset $828,246 of those unanticipated costs. So I urge you to consider this information during your discussions. We are trying very hard to revitalize our little city, and a thriving school district adds to the value of our community. And thank you very much for the consideration.
Questions from the senators? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The last person on the list is from New Hampshire Ed Manganiello.
Yep.
Okay. Wasn't quite sure. It looks like it might be Mark, but
Mark Manganiello, Bureau of School Finance, Department of Education. I'm here for technical assistance, and if you have any questions.
questions from the senators? Okay, I guess not. Thank you. That is the last person on the list who decided to sign up to speak. There were an additional 4 people who signed up. All in support did not speak. There's 246 signed up online in support, 3 signed up opposed. And unless there's somebody who just absolutely has to speak, we'll close the public hearing. And we'll see if I have a motion to go into executive session.
You do, so moved.
We have a motion and a second to go into executive session. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. We are in executive session. Yeah. All right. The audience, if you're going to stay for the hearing, the executive session, then you're welcome. Just have to be quiet. And if you're not, please leave.
Make sure you tell them we're not going to executive.
We're not going to do this yours?
No.
Oh.
The education.
I don't anticipate executing the education bill today. I do not anticipate that committee could overrule me, but you know, it's not going to count on us.
Yeah, right?
I have been surprised before.
Okay. Don't bring those to us.
1307.
1307?
Move on to pass. Move on to pass.
Okay, just let me get to it so I can take my notes at the same time. All right, so ought to pass, that was Senator Birdsall.
Seconded by
And
Senator.
seconded by Senator Rosenwald.
Yeah.
Discussion on 1307? Seeing none. All those in favor? Oh. All right.
So if I understand this correctly, this is a $401,000 appropriation to a very small number of people.
800.
And does it have to be an FY24?
LBA? I like that stare.
Yeah, please no. I don't have an do you mean, does it have to be based on the bills written, or does this payment have to be made in that calendar year versus, or
if we
fiscal year
change
versus
the
25?
effective date to July 1, 2024, it'd be an FY25.
Correct. Yes, that would make sense.
Sounds
And
like-
effectively, it wouldn't matter. I mean, the people would get the payment when they get the payment, but it would make it a little bit easier for budgeting purposes, right? This year.
I'm not an expert on this bill, but that makes sense to me. If you want to have this payment, or this be a charge to fiscal 25, that could be done through an amendment.
I think reinforcements have arrived.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess.
You can sit at the table if you'd like.
It's fairly small money, though.
It
You
is
can-
fairly.
you can sit at the
small.
table
I
if
think
you'd like.
25 is going to be better than 24.
If you want, you can.
And I don't think it's a big deal either way, if that's what you prefer.
Yeah, that's what I prefer.
If you want to, if some of the senators want to sit and think about this for a week, you can.
I'd be ready to vote for it if we just changed to July 1, 2024.
Okay,
I
so
can support
Senator
that.
Bradley offers a committee amendment,
I'll second it.
seconded by Senator Ennis. All right. Does LBA understand the committee amendment? Okay. Further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the committee amendment say aye. Aye. All those opposed? The ayes have it. And now we have the bill as amended.
Move on to pass as amended.
It's already, you
Okay.
already did that. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. And the ayes have it, and Senator Birdsall gets to take it out. Okay, I've been requested to hold 1647 and 1678. The next one, I'll recognize Senator Birdsall to talk about House Bill 322.
Okay, so I had a conversation with Henry Lippman last night, and I will give you a copy of the amendment 1428S, which authorizes the additional money towards the nursing facility of $750,000. But I have an additional amendment that I probably would want to see as a committee amendment. And basically what it does is it requires, whether he's the single owner or the interested owners as well, as long as he has, keeps the facility for a period of 5 years, that he has the conditions met with the amendment 1428S. If he does not comply with the conditions that are required, then he will be required to pay back 1/5 of the payment made to the facility for each year any of the conditions were not satisfied.
Okay, so let's take this. Senator Birdsall moves ought to pass. Do I have a second? Okay. And Senator Birdsall further moves amendment 1428S. Is that right?
No. Well, I'll move 1428S, which is kind of the first one.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
So we take that one.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, 1428 is already included, I thought, in this bill, in the version amended by the Senate?
Then we don't have to worry about that. Okay. All right, so
This would be the committee amendment.
Senator Birdsall moves a committee amendment, and does LBA have a copy?
I will give them a copy.
So I've seen a draft copy of it, but I haven't seen an official produced by OLS yet.
It hasn't been produced by OLS yet. That's why it's a committee amendment. And I'll pass my copy down. All the rest of you senators, you've seen the draft amendment? Discussion on the draft? Oh, I gotta get a second on the. Second. All right. So we got her on the first one, so we'll keep her, you know. All right. So discussion on the committee amendment. Seeing none. The question is on the committee amendment. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. And is there any further discussion before we take the bill as amended? Seeing none. All those in favor of the bill as amended say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. And Senator Birdsall, you get double duty here, you know.
Such is life.
All right. 1191 FN and 1696. I didn't have a recommendation whether to discuss those today or not, so what is your pleasure? 1191 is the one that does the exceptions to the room and meals tax for participants in the restaurant voucher program.
Can you do that?
We'll move on to pass.
I didn't hear what you said. Okay. Senator Ennis and Senator Rosenwald. Further discussion?
What was the cost of that one?
It's 86,000 to 172,000 state funds. Senator Rosenwald, you speak.
Thank you. So we have this bill in Ways and Means, and part of the testimony, which is not addressed in the fiscal note, is that some of the Meals on Wheels recipients might bring friends with them to this restaurant who would pay. So there would be some offset to the revenue decrease. Probably not a huge amount, but it probably would not be the whole nut.
Further discussion? Yeah, I got two lights on.
Oh.
All right. Lights are out. All right, the motion is ought to pass. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? 5-1.
I'll take it out if you like.
Senator Ennis is taking it up. Shall we discuss 1696 today?
I don't even remember that one.
It deals with the local record retention.
Which number is this again?
1696. Yep.
Why does it have to take place this biennium?
It doesn't,
I mean,
I mean,
is this the kind of thing we could push off for a year?
would you like to make the motion interim study, or would you like to ITL?
Well, I don't serve on
there a third
election
choice?
law, so I'm probably not the best person to make either motion.
I will move interim study.
I will second.
Okay.
And do we have any other discussion?
Right.
All those in favor of interim study say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Ayes have it, and Senator Pearl, you haven't taken one out yet today, so you get this one. You seconded it. All right.
No, I got one.
Yeah, he got one. He got one. I didn't pass him by. All right, we did hear some bills today. I think that the education one should at least wait at the last one, 1583. Is there anyone that wants to take out the other ones today? Or shall we caucus, or shall we what?
I think the first one needs some work if we're going to pass it. I mean, the fiscal committee can't appropriate money from the general funds without some sleight of hand, and we can't appropriate money at all from the rainy day fund. And I'm not sure about those two funds, whether they need to be fixed. So
The first one, I kind of feel that that needs to come back to us in a budget year. But
well, it didn't have any funding in it. It didn't have any funding in it.
Yeah,
It just created a fund but put nothing in it.
and so
So what,
in this bill and in the education bill, we are talking about making a significant difference in how we fund this disaster relief and in how we fund education compared to the formula that we currently use this year. And it's, so probably the best thing to do is, since I don't have a lot of rousing, oh, I want to take this one, is to ask for a motion to come out of executive session and push this off till next. We have a motion and a second to come out of executive session.
just a question, so you're not planning to take up the DHHS one?
If you want to talk, at least have a discussion about it.
Well-
I haven't ruled anything on the come out of executive session yet, so.
Yeah, I just want to say that, the department obviously
Yeah.
knew about this.
That was a good question you asked.
And they could have come to us last April when we had the budget and asked for this money. That's separate from whether or not we move forward from this, but I just wish departments wouldn't not tell us things and then come back in the middle of a biennium.
Amen. Okay, so we'll get a renewed motion for coming out of executive session and a renewed second. All those in favor of coming out of executive session say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, our business of the day being complete, we are adjourned.